Alrighty, so today we're going to talk a little bit about plyometrics and what their role is in training and just in athletic movement overall. I've got some notes here just to guide the conversation a little bit, but don't worry, this is going to be just as filled with tangents as usual. But essentially where I wanted to start when it comes to plyometrics is what the difference is between a plyometric and a jump, because I think that a lot of people say plyometrics a lot of the time, and it's not that it's a harmful thing, but they don't really use the term correctly and define it. So essentially a jump is anything that you're coming off of the ground and then there's a landing component to it, right? Whereas a plyometric specifically uses the stretch shortening cycle in order to propel yourself off of the ground further. I'll explain a little bit more about what the stretch shortening cycle is in a minute. But the reason that this definition is important is because they work on two different qualities, okay? So our jumps, they can be defined as a little bit more muscular. So there's a little bit of the distance. There is a greater component that just like how strong or powerful you are is going to contribute to the potential distance or height of the jump. The other part of it is that landing component, it doesn't necessarily like result in the next jump. Okay, so a jump can just be a single vertical jump where you get down, you get back up, and then you land. And then that's it. Whereas our plyometric stuff, it makes use of the stretch shortening cycle in order to jump further. So it is a type of jump. It is not all jumps are plyometrics. Yeah, it's a thing that it's within the circle. It's not necessarily outside of the circle and a completely different thing. So when we talk about what specifically makes a plyo or characteristics of plyos, the first thing I mentioned was that stretch shortening cycle. Essentially what the stretch shortening cycle is it's a mechanism within our muscles where when they first get longer, there is some energy return when you rapidly then concentrically pull back together. Okay, so if this is the length of the muscle, and this is like the natural length of the muscle, that stretch puts it in a position that it wants to return back to, okay? So it wants to be at this length, okay? We can squeeze it to be a bit shorter, and that's where like you might be like flexing really hard, but we can also lengthen it. And when we lengthen that muscle, it wants to come back to here. And if we do that in a rapid way, neuromuscularly and all that kind of stuff, then we're going to get a certain extra amount of energy past just that we generate muscularly, okay? And that's why that initial definition is important, because if we're trying to make use of the stretch shortening cycle, we need that rapid eccentric into then the concentric, okay? And that is what lets us get more out of it than just our muscles. Now, what components lead to the stretch shortening cycle being able to do that? Well, number one, there's a bunch of passive tissue that all of a sudden you get to use in an elastic nature, okay? So like I said, our muscles, when they get longer, they want to return to this length again. But it's not just that. You've got a bunch of tendons and ligaments that when they get longer, they also want to return to that position, yeah? So you've got a bunch of elastic property that results in that, okay? Now, typically what we find with these plyometrics is that development happens, and that elastic property happens typically under 250 milliseconds of ground contact time, okay? So this is another thing that defines jumps away from plyometrics away from just your regular jumps, in that for us to really make use of that stretch shortening cycle to a high degree, we're realistically contacting with the ground and getting back off the ground in under 250 milliseconds or a quarter of a second, right? So it's really, really quick, okay? Now, the reason that that's important to define is because we might get a little bit of stretch shortening cycle use, we will get some stretch shortening cycle use if you do a really quick eccentric for a jump, okay? So if you're up nice and tall and it's a dip and go, there will be a stretch shortening cycle element of that for your jump, and that's going to help you jump quicker. That's why when people are going for maximal vertical jumps, they're not slowly bringing themselves down and then jumping back up. And that's going to be a really big key difference that you see between the really elite jumpers and the people who haven't really jumped ever before in their life. A lot of people who haven't really jumped before, when you see them practice for the first time, they go to that bottom position. Sometimes they'll like hold it there for 2 or 3 seconds, or they'll slowly descend down before they go back up. They lose all stretch shortening cycle, okay? So some jumps use stretch shortening cycle, all plyometrics will use that stretch shortening cycle to produce force and use those elastic properties, and they're going to be using it a lot more than just a regular vertical jump. But then the next step is with those plyometrics, they then make use of that within that 250 seconds ground contact time. The third thing is that amortization phase. So before we spoke about the lengthening and then the shortening, that amortization phase is really, really important. And what that is the time between that muscle getting longer and then getting shorter again. Okay, so that pause in between, okay? It's essentially turning it around. Okay, you might think about, so if gravity is constantly pulling me down and this is the ground, gravity is always pulling me down, okay? Amortization is the time period where you are not moving anymore. You're not moving closer to the ground and you're not moving up. That's instantaneous when we look at like a physics perspective. So we're here, we're going down, this is going to have the eccentric action, and then as soon as I turn around and start going back up, then that is going to be the concentric. That moment in between is our amortization phase. Now, essentially what this is important about in our plyometrics is that this is where a lot of the failure happens, because we are putting a lot of strain on that amortization phase. Yeah. In a regular jump, you might have a bit more difficulty in that concentric action. Yeah. You might have a bit more difficulty in like actually getting into the descent. With our plyometrics, because they're generally a lot more intense in terms of it having to turn around really quickly, having to have that quick contact, because that turnaround is the intensive part, typically this is where we're going to fail. Typically, this is where most people struggle to begin with, and you might see them get a couple pogos, for example. That's where a lot of plyometrics, that's where a lot of people start with plyometrics. You might see a few pogos, and then all of a sudden they just almost fall on a flat tire. Yeah, that flat tire is that amortization phase failing and not returning, okay? When that happens, that is them obviously not making good use of the stretch shortening cycle, whether it's because of ability in terms of what the tissues can tolerate, or whether it's because of just the skill level, right? But really, really important that we understand that that amortization phase is a really key thing to focus on with plyometrics, and in turn with that, it is also the part where most people fail their plyometrics. So then, next thing, why is it important that we work on our plyometrics? So when we are looking at trying to develop for athletic purposes, right? So if you're trying to get faster, if you're trying to be able to just run for longer, if you're trying to be able to tolerate more impact, right? Then it's important that we develop plyometrics. So from a goals perspective for the people that would want to work on plyometrics, the people that plyometrics might end up taking a decent chunk of their training is the people that do have those kinds of athletic goals. Okay, if you want to be athletic, you got to do some sort of plyometrics, some sort of jumping as well. But beyond that, plyometrics developing things like just our central nervous system from being able to fire and actually really quickly produce force. Yeah, similar to our power, variations. Another thing is that they let you introduce impact into somebody's program in a way that you can really easily progress. Yeah, and we know as people age, their bone density goes down, and things like impact can maintain or increase people's bone density as they get older. So plyometrics can be a really useful tool to actually increase that over time, and using those progressions can help you do it in a way that is phased for the individual. And this is in a way that is outside of just getting your muscles stronger. So those same benefits can come from getting your muscles stronger, right? You can increase your bone density for the general population. You can increase your ability to take impact by getting stronger. You can get faster, jump higher, all that kind of stuff. You can get more athletic just by getting stronger. But when you're just working on getting stronger, it just works on the tolerance of your tissue to those things, right? It is just working on the muscle fibers, right? Whereas plyometrics, they have number one, a rhythm and coordination aspect, so you can become more coordinated through it, and that is going to pay dividends when you're looking at athletic purposes. The other thing is that it also trains those passive structures. So in a squat, especially if you're not squatting 2-3 times your body weight, you might not necessarily be training those passive ligaments and tendons as much. Okay, whereas in plyometrics, they have no choice but to work, and that is the whole purpose of them in the stretch shortening cycle. And then you're also working your central nervous system in a way that simply is not happening through strength movements, yeah? If you get really, really heavy in a squat, you are producing a lot of force over a longer amount of time, yeah? Whereas that amount of force, when you're doing a plyometric, you need to produce it in a much shorter amount of time to get that rebound. So you're reducing the amount of time that it takes to produce force, which not only will actually probably help your lifting as well, but it's going to help those athletic contexts. So that's why it's important from a physical perspective to actually focus on plyometrics for yourself. Now, this then begs the question, what are the different types of plyometrics and where do I kind of start with it, okay? So there's a few different ways that we can categorize plyometrics, and it's important that as you go along, you obviously do things that are relevant to you, but getting some sort of range in them and doing a whole bunch of different things is actually really beneficial, not only from a rhythm and coordination perspective, but just like with your lifts, how if you just back squat to eternity with the same exact method and same exact reps for all time, it's eventually going to lose a little bit of the juice that you can squeeze out of it. It's the same thing with plyometrics. So giving yourself new things over time gives your body a new challenge to adapt to. And once you squeeze the juice out of that adaptation and it kind of slows down, then you can move into something new so that you can continue that adaptation going. So try different stuff just for the sake of it, but also give yourself a different challenge. So the first two different ways that we can separate out our plyometrics is intensive versus extensive, okay? So it's really, really key to understand that we still need our plyometrics to be quick and we still need them to be powerful, but intensive means, as it might sound, more intense, so quicker, yeah, you might be producing more power and getting higher off of the ground. The really difficult ones that we're not able to repeat that many times, yeah? You might be doing drop jumps off of a box. You probably can't do 100 drop jumps or 200 drop jumps in a session because it's gonna cook you and it's very intensive and trying to get as high as you can. Whereas extensive are our more repeatable efforts that still make use of that stretch shortening cycle. They might be on that higher end of 250, maybe even going up to 300, 350 milliseconds on the ground. This could be things like skipping, yeah? You know, we all know one crazy person who just skips non-stop and keeps on going. The only reason they are able to do that is because when they are skipping, they are not rebounding as high as they physically can. They are doing it within a limit that they're able to, and that might result in multiple hundreds of skips within a day or a session or whatever it looks like. So they still have a benefit. It's just a little bit different, right? It might be a little bit lower tier, so it might be something a bit better for beginners to get into. The other thing is that this works on our endurance and our ability to repeat those performances, which can be important, especially depending on the type of sport that you might be playing. Locomotive. So locomotive just refers to if it is something where you are moving forward, okay? So you might have to transition through your foot, or whether it's just something that might be stationary or might not necessarily look like one foot to the other. You can go forward, you can go backward, you can go lateral. So obviously that's going to change how your foot interacts with the ground. And all of those different directions are important, especially if you've got a sport where you move very lateral. You should probably do some lateral plyometrics. Whereas if you don't really have much lateral movement, that might be a little bit less important. You might spend a little bit less time on it. And then also different types of stances, yeah? So you might just go like a regular double stance, you might go a split stance, you might go a single leg. There's a bunch of different ways that we can do our plyometrics just to vary it up a little bit and get different amounts of intensity. Now there's a little asterisk here, and there's a bit of talk going around on the internet about deep tier plyometrics. And I think that it's a valuable category, and that's why I'm including it here. But I think that the thing to, I think there's a couple of considerations that you need to have around deep tier plyometrics. So number one, what are deep tier plyometrics? They're plyometrics where you're in a deeper range of motion. So you might be in a deep squat at the bottom of it and just bouncing out of that position. So doing those jumps out of that position. You might be moving forwards out of that. So it's where your quad, your hamstring, everything are going to be in a deeper range, and you're jumping out of that. Now, does this have a benefit? Absolutely. Does it pull us away from the plyometric end of the spectrum? Absolutely as well. Because of that deep range, it is naturally a lot harder to be quick through the ground, and you go quite a bit further away from that 250 milliseconds. So they are a little bit closer to our jumps rather than our plyometrics. Now, are they important? Absolutely, because in things like in sport or in life, you're going to spend time in those deeper ranges of motion. But it is just really important to understand that as you go through, you can't necessarily mimic all of the different qualities of a plyometric through these, and they are just another tool in your tool belt, not necessarily the only tool. They might, in terms of their use, I would say they can probably be used a little bit more in the gym rather than on the track and that kind of stuff. And I would pair them up with your other strength movements as like almost like a warm up to them or stuff like that to produce force out of those bottom positions. And you can almost use it to aid you out of that. So let's say that you're struggling with the bottom of your squat and trying to turn around that weight. As you go down, there is an amortization phase in the squat as well. You are going down. That moment that you are technically stationary or turning around your direction, that is amortization. Now, the bottom of the squat, where people get stuck in the bottom of a squat, that is happening because they don't have the ability to produce force out of that bottom part, and they probably can't produce force quickly enough. So if you're doing deep tier plyometrics at the bottom of the squat, it can actually help you get out of the hole, get out of the bottom of the squat a little bit better because you're working on that amortization phase. That's, to me, is more of the use case for deep tier, as well as, again, just something to vary it up. But just be careful when you look at it. A lot of people present it as like the big, fancy, shiny new toy. It's just another tool in your tool belt. So, last little bit. So as we go through our plyometrics, what are some things to aim for so that we can keep them as plyometrics and not go back into jump territory? Number one is be quick off the ground. If you're not quick off the ground, you can't do any of the other things, and you're trying to aim for spending less time on the ground. There will be a point where you probably swing that pendulum a little bit too far and you can't really get power out of it. Use a coach to help you work that out. Video yourself. Think, do these look springy? Yeah, springy, stiff, those are all words that we want to be using. And a lot of the time, if you video it and you look at it and you're like, this doesn't look springy, it just looks like I'm trying to smack the ground, then you might not be quite hitting the mark there. Next thing, stiffness, okay? So you want to create stiffness. What that means is in something like a pogo where you're really up tall and you're just using your calf and ankle to bounce out, is your knee and hips shouldn't move. Yeah, if you're doing hops, you're not getting into these deeper ranges of motion. You're hitting the ground and rebounding very quickly. Forefoot. So as you're bouncing through on the ground, you want to be using your forefoot rather than your heel because your heel introduces a whole bunch of braking forces, which are obviously involved in trying to slow you down. Whereas when you're on your forefoot, you're trying to propel yourself forward, propel yourself up in a way that is going to be quicker. Additionally, you can also make use of the fascia under your foot to assist with the stretch shortening cycle. So it just adds an extra little bit of tension that you're able to make use of. And the last thing is attack the ground. So when we're going through our plyometrics, a lot of people, and this is probably more of like a demonstration video that I can do down the line. I think that there's a lot more depth that we can go into with plyometrics. But essentially, as you jump and you reach the peak, you want to lift your toes up, lift your feet up, so then you can attack the ground again. And as you go down, extend your foot. So being really actually aggressive and trying to attack the ground, put a hole in the ground, is really, really important for your plyometrics. So that's kind of some things that you want to focus on when you do implement them. Now, how do you integrate them, or where do you start? If you're watching this video, you probably haven't done a lot of plyometrics in your training before. So what I would say is for beginners, I would start by just putting them in your warm-up. Yeah, you can put them in your strength session warm-ups. You can put them in your sprint or running warm-ups. Yeah. Make sure you can actually adapt which ones you do based on what you're doing in that session, right? So like I said earlier, if you're doing heavy squats, it might be useful to actually throw in some sort of a deep tier jump in there. Okay, you might do split stance jumps. You might do a whole bunch of different things that actually look a little bit like what your session is going to look like, especially when you're on the field. So I would start off by putting them in your warm-ups and have them on the back end of that warm-up where you can be really intense with them. You can actually put in some effort with them, but because you're already warmed up, but you're not actually within that session once you've gotten fatigued with your strength stuff, yeah? A really big no-go that I would say with your plyometrics is try to avoid putting them at the back end of your session unless they are really, really extensive and endurance-based, okay? Which obviously, as we've already said, once you go to that extensive end, you do risk going back into like that jump space. I would say, yeah, let's put them at the start of your sessions generally in that warm-up so that you can integrate them. As you start to get more advanced, you can start putting them within sessions and you can start thinking about things like contrasting your strength lifts or whatever it is, right? But the really important thing is, and the reason why I say for them to go first is because I want you to be fresh when you do them and I want you to be ready to let your CNS fire. The second that you do 4 sets of heavy squats, it's going to make it really, really hard for you to produce that same force as quickly as what you could before that. So yeah, that's it. That's all of the basics about our plyometrics and our plyometric progressions and how we necessarily integrate them into our session. As I said, plyometrics are a really, really useful tool, and especially if you're trying to be athletic, but even for general population, I think that they are an often underutilized tool because the amount of benefit that you can get out of a few sets of pogos and a few sets of like really like springing, like split stance jumps or whatever, the amount of benefit that you can get out of something that probably takes you like 5 or 10 minutes in your week is actually really, really big. Compared to maybe all of the other like strengthier exercises that you're doing, which are important, but the time to benefit is huge, especially to begin with. So what I would say is try and integrate them into your session. Let me know if you do have any questions. Like I said, just like I said with the demonstration part, I want to make more videos about this in the future, more like technical integrated videos just on like specific technique or different parts of what we spoke about today. So if you've got questions, let me know and I'd be eager to talk you through it. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Click, let's say here for a video that YouTube recommends you.